Oh, it's fantastic to be here, and it was great following Jono. I mean, having this incredible vision about where we're going, and I really want to re-emphasise what Jono is saying is this is real and it is coming. And so what I really want to focus on is the mundane reality of making this happen. So I love hearing about the vision, but my business actually has to turn this into a way of making money for our customers and for us to actually make a buck. So we're kind of at it's not the more mundane, it's just the reality end of this, of going, how do you turn the vision into something practical that can actually help our customers improve their yields. And in a way, we call the yield for a reason, because if you can't affect that, you really don't have a business. And so this is what we really focus on. So what I wanted to do is share with you a story, I suppose, about where the business started, particularly very relevant to this audience, in the oyster industry. And just like oysters are an entree to your meal, they're kind of an entree to our business, because we actually learned how to do this Internet of Things, brave new world that Jono's talking about in this industry. So what do we do? The yield, what we do is we really focus on taking the guesswork out of growing. And the biggest guesswork of them all, whether it's agriculture or aquaculture, is actually driven by weather, because it's the one thing that you can't actually control. And so what we do is that we do end-to-end solutions, just like Jono was talking about. We use sensors that measure things. We put that into platforms which we combine with data from other sources. We then use artificial intelligence, all these buzzwords, to turn it into really simple user interfaces that people can actually use to help them make better decisions. And so we do all of that as an end-to-end service. So we kind of do Internet of Things as a service, and then we customise it to the business problem that people are actually trying to solve. So what's really important about this is the power of simplicity, because we're awash in data. There's too much data. How do you distill that into something that you're actually trying to make a decision about? Now, in the case of the app there, this is actually a free app that the business provides to the agriculture community. That's actually measuring evapotranspiration, which is the amount of water that a plant uses from evaporation and transpiration. We crunch 2.5 million records every 6 hours to generate that as a prediction. But you would never see that. And then it's got quite complex overlay of formula. What we distill it to is just that little raindrop, because that's the way that people can actually understand information. So let me dive into oysters. We actually started our first solution in the oyster industry in Tasmania. So we put real-time sensing technology out, electronics in salt water, in the roaring 40s, in open bays, to try to actually solve this problem, which I'll come to in a minute. This is not an easy thing to do. And one of the things we're actually really proud about is if you're going to do Internet of Things and real-time data, you have to make sure it works. Because if it doesn't work, then it doesn't help. If it works sometimes and not other times, for anyone knows from a business perspective, it's better not to have it at all. So getting it so that it's actually reliable is really important. So we have a 99.5% uptime. I hope there's no one from Telstra in the room, because basically the only time we go down is typically because Telstra's down. But we also use artificial intelligence to do predictions, and we have a 90% accuracy 3 days out. But one of the things we're really kind of proud about is that our technology is used. When we offered it into the Tasmanian industry after POMS, which was a really big crisis in Tasmanian oyster industry, we got a 90% sign up, and 50% of growers use our technology every day. And that's a really important metric in terms of, there's no point creating all this groovy stuff if people don't actually use it. So let me tell you a little bit about the problem that we're solving. Effectively, sorry, I'm just going to go back one. Effectively, what happens is, because oysters are filter animals, when it rains, you get runoff from the soil and they accumulate contaminants that make them dangerous to eat. And so what the food safety regulator was doing was using rainfall from the nearest weather station as a way of a proxy for runoff. And so what we did is put real-time sensing into the water to measure salinity in real time. So as fresh water comes into the system, salinity goes down. And so that's a finer level proxy. So just shifting from this wide area proxy down to this localised proxy, we can reduce unnecessary harvest closures by 30%, giving back the industry 4 weeks a year to harvest. So that's a big deal. And at the time, depending on the time of the year, if you're oyster growers, as you I'm sure all know, it's particularly are working in if it happens at Christmas or Easter or Chinese New Year, total disaster. They can lose, depending on the business, $120,000 a day if they're shut. So we had a very real problem that we were solving and using technology to do it. But some of the lessons learned are certainly reliability, but the other thing that's really important to understand is the importance of accuracy, because everybody knows garbage in is garbage out. And so one of the things that we really focus on is not only reliability, but accuracy. So if you're opening and closing on salinity, it's really important for us that we get a high level of accuracy. And just to give you an example of this, on the left hand is a greenspan sensor, often used in the industry in aquaculture, and effectively it biofouls. And so what these two graphs are showing you, on the left-hand side, the greenspan sensor, that's number of days. Within 10 days, the round little dots are accurate what the salinity really is, and the graph is showing what it measures if it's left alone. And you can see within 10 days, it's basically useless. And the sensor that we use, which is to the right, has got a much higher level of accuracy, and it doesn't drift, it doesn't biofoul because of the nature of the technology. It's a slightly more expensive, it's a significantly more expensive sensor, but over the life cycle of 3 years, it's kind of a cup of coffee a week difference. But the critical issue is the data's right. And this is one of the things I really want to emphasise. If you haven't got accurate data, then really you haven't really got a way of making better decisions. And why this is so important to us is that we actually use this data to predict. So coming back to one of Jono's buzzwords, which is artificial intelligence, we use artificial intelligence and neural networks to predict salinity. So as I said, salinity is what the regulator opens and closes on. And so if I'm a grower, I want to first of all know that I've got the opening and closing on accurate data. But secondly, if we can predict when they're going to be closed, not only do we give them 4 weeks leave, 4 weeks extra harvest period back, but they can also know when they're going to be shut to get product out of the water before they are. So what this graph is showing you is how right we are. So each one of those coloured lines is a bay where we have sensing technology, and this is showing you how right we are 3 days out for our 3-day prediction. And we also put a 5% buffer in there because we'd like to play safe. So you can see two things that's really interesting about this graph. One is we're 90 to 95% accurate in our prediction 3 days out using artificial intelligence. But secondly, you can see how the graph is coming together. That's because it's learning. It's learning from itself. And this is part of what artificial intelligence and machine learning means. It gets better and better and better and better the longer that you have it there, provided your data is accurate and that you have reliable systems. You have gappy data, poor data, you've got garbage in, you've got garbage out. So similarly, temperature. So if you know food safety, I'm looking at Anne and Ali sitting here, the two things that you measure in aquaculture are really important is salinity and temperature, because these are things that undersit food safety models. And you can see here that we're predicting this as well very accurately, and again it's getting closer and closer and closer. But that's not what our customers see. What they see is apps. And on the right-hand side there, you can see those 3 dials. That's actually giving you temperature, salinity, and depth. And they just simply change colours when they're actually approaching a closure and a closure. So it's a really, really simple user interface that we spent hours with growers understanding how they wanted to use the technology. But we also use the technology, so same knowledge infrastructure. We've got a product that growers use for a whole series of on-farm decisions. But we also sell our product, a different digital solution, to the Food Safety Regulator. New South Wales Food Safety Authority and also the Tasmanian Food Safety Authority use our technology to actually manage the opening and closing of harvesting. And so in this digital interface, they can set their rules, they can associate growers to the harvest area, they can monitor it all in real time, they notify everyone, including food authorities, and so it's all managed in one place, but from the same common source of truth. So we just get rid of a whole lot of disputation in the industry because everyone knows what the fact is. So what's really interesting, and this is coming back to the brutal commercial reality of doing Internet of Things, is you've got to make a buck to make this pay. And so really, this is my common piece on this, is you're never going to make it pay if you just try to solve one business problem at a time. So what we try to do is say, if we create this knowledge infrastructure, which takes a fair bit of engineering clout, then we have different solutions using that same knowledge infrastructure. And in the example I just gave you, we have an enterprise productivity tool that growers use to help optimise on-farm decisions, from labour scheduling to when they're opening and closing to provenance tracking, all of those things. We also use that same knowledge infrastructure for a different digital solution to government, which is kind of like an aggregator because they're looking at what's happening on farm. And we also give it to researchers via a CRC, which I'm going to come to in a minute, to create new knowledge so that they don't have to collect the same data to actually solve problems, speeding up the innovation process and making it faster from getting lab into people's hand because we can just drop it into our product. It's just an algorithm we just put in the back end. So it's this ecosystem that I think is really the future. The currency of the digital economy is data. How do we actually structure that it makes business sense? And I often talk about this as a flower. You know, you can see this as petals almost, people taking data out, interacting, putting data back in. And you know, I've often spoken with Brian about how potentially knowing what's happening across, say, for example, the oyster industry could be really helpful further up the supply chain. Because if you know when people are going to be open and closed, you know what sort of stock they've got, you can actually optimise that. But then we really need to do this in a way that's transparent so that growers who control and own their data are part of the process and sharing the upside. But there's just enormous potential around how we repurpose and reuse data to create value across the supply chain. So I just want to talk about food agility, and Aston here is chair of the Food Agility CRC is here with us today. The Food Agility CRC is actually looking at how we use digital infrastructure in the way that I've described across the whole food supply chain, agri and aqua. And in particular, this idea of data in circulation. How can we speed up the innovation process in research, and how can we also get value out of data across the supply chain? So it's a $200 million effort over 10 years, of which there are industry partners, researchers, government and technology companies like mine involved. And one of the first projects which I'm authorised to share with you today is that the board has approved the rollout of our technology for the oyster industry across New South Wales. So we're looking to hit it for this season. We'll do about 80% of harvest areas across New South Wales. And what really importantly, that model that I just talked about how we have this kind of way of sharing data is what we're actually going to be doing. So we're going to deploy our technology. We're going to give growers instantaneously our solutions as part of the project. And then we're giving data to researchers at UTS and DPI, particularly Shauna Murray, who specialises in the oyster industry, and Wayne O'Connor at DPI. And they're going to be using the data to develop new biophysical models to work out what the triggers for salinity should be, so that now we're getting those tighter and tighter and tighter, so we're not closed unnecessarily. And secondly, to use it for disease modelling, for particularly things like QX and winter mortality, so that we can help growers improve the way they're managing disease risk in the industry. So it's a really exciting project, and I think putting in practice this sort of approach, which we hope will be a flagship in the food agility family for a whole lot of projects looking at how do we leverage data across a supply chain to actually grow and drive innovation and deliver to market quickly really practical solutions that's going to help everyone across the supply chain. So very excited to be part of that. I could tell you about a whole lot more. We're about to launch our agricultural product in the 9th of October, which uses all of this technology that we learnt in the oyster industry, we're now applying into agriculture. And so I'll always have a very strong soft spot for this industry because it really helped us develop a whole lot of technology that's helping us grow the business. And I really look forward to working with the whole industry long term as a technology partner. So thanks very much.